For a while, I swear it felt real. Not fully, not completely, but close enough. Close enough to believe in it. Close enough to hurt when it disappeared. We had moments that felt like something. Late night talks that went too deep. Silences that didn't feel empty. Smiles that lasted a little too long. And I started building meaning from those moments, like they were proof that we were becoming something real. But they were just fragments scattered across uncertainty. You were never fully in, and I was never fully out. We existed in that in-between space where everything feels possible, but nothing is confirmed. And I mistook possibility for reality. Maybe that's the danger of feeling too much too soon. You start believing in something that never fully arrives. It almost felt real every time you looked at me differently. Every time the distance disappeared for just a moment, it almost felt real. And that's why it still lingers, because almost love leaves a permanent echo. I remember questioning it sometimes, wondering if I was imagining the connection or if it truly existed. But then you'd come closer again, in small ways and inconsistent ways, just enough to keep me believing. And I stayed in that cycle. Hope, distance, hope again, distance again, until I stopped knowing what was real and what I was creating inside my mind. And honestly, that confusion became its own kind of attachment. We never defined it, because defining it would have made it real. It almost felt real, but never stayed real long enough. It came in waves, then disappeared in silence. It almost felt real, and I think that's what hurts now, because I lived inside something that never fully existed. Maybe some connections are designed that way, not to last, not to break loudly, but to exist briefly, just enough to make you believe in something that was never meant to hold shape. And maybe that's why it hurts differently, 'cause nothing was officially lost, yet everything still feels gone. It almost felt real, and I still carry that feeling with me, like a memory that never fully formed, but refuses to fade. It almost felt real, and now I understand some things don't end, they just dissolve before they ever become something solid. It almost felt real, and maybe that's why it still feels real. In the places I can't explain. For a while, I convinced myself that almost was enough. Almost loved, almost chosen, almost stayed. But eventually, almost started hurting more than nothing. You gave me pieces of affection, small moments, careful words, temporary closeness that felt real at the time. And I held on to all of it too tightly, because lonely hearts know how to survive on fragments. I remember the nights where your attention felt warm enough to silence my fears briefly, but every beautiful moment was followed by distance again. And slowly I started realizing I was building permanence from things that were never fully certain. You stayed close enough to keep me emotionally attached, but never close enough to truly remain. Almost was enough until I needed consistency, until I needed effort that didn't disappear overnight. Almost was enough until my heart got tired of surviving on temporary warmth from someone unsure about me. I think part of me knew the truth early, the hesitation in your voice, the uncertainty hidden behind your kindness, the way your love arrived in waves instead of stability. But I ignored all of it, because hope can make unfinished things feel complete for a little while. I kept replaying the moments where you cared, trying to convince myself they mattered more than the moments you disappeared emotionally. And honestly, that contradiction slowly destroyed me. It's exhausting loving someone who keeps changing their distance from you. Almost was enough, while I still believed you'd fully choose me someday, while I still mistook confusion for depth and inconsistency for complexity. Almost was enough until I realized love shouldn't leave you constantly wondering where you stand in someone's heart. Maybe some people enter your life only halfway, not because they never cared, but because they never learned how to stay completely. And maybe I kept accepting less, because I was afraid of losing even that. Almost was enough until the loneliness became impossible to ignore, until the silence lasted longer than the closeness, until the uncertainty became my daily reality. Almost was enough, but not enough to heal with, not enough to build forever on, not enough to survive emotionally. And now I finally understand, something incomplete can still completely break you. I used to romanticize the almost, but now I think my heart deserves something that stays without hesitation. Maybe that's why it hurt so deeply, because for a little while you made it feel real again, and I almost believed we still had a future. You started talking softer to me again, sending late night messages, asking questions you stopped asking months ago. And suddenly my guarded heart opened too quickly. I hated how easily hope returned. One small moment of warmth from you, and I was already imagining forever again. That's The dangerous thing about missing someone, you mistake temporary closeness for permanent change. And I kept falling for it, because part of me never stopped loving you. I should've noticed how inconsistent your affection felt, but loneliness can make uncertainty look like love. I almost believed you were finally coming back emotionally. Almost trusted the way you held me, the way you said my name again. I almost believed we could return to who we were before, but almost healed love still breaks apart. In the end, there were nights where everything felt normal again. We laughed naturally, talked for hours, sat close without tension. And for a moment I forgot all the distance between us, forgot the silence, forgot the loneliness, forgot how many times I cried over you quietly. But healing isn't made of temporary moments, and deep down I could still feel you hesitating, like part of you wanted me while another part was already leaving again. You gave me enough hope to reopen wounds I barely survived closing. I almost believed every promise sounded softer this time, every touch felt familiar enough to confuse my heart all over again. I almost believed you finally understood what we lost, but your uncertainty kept bleeding through every beautiful moment we tried to rebuild. Maybe some people don't leave completely. Maybe they return in fragments, just enough to remind you what love felt like before disappearing again. And maybe that's crueler than leaving all at once. I almost believed we were finding our way back, but this time you would stay emotionally present instead of fading quietly again. I almost believed all the warmth meant something permanent, but now I understand. Sometimes people miss you without truly wanting to keep you. And maybe that's the hardest truth, not that you came back briefly, but that I let myself believe you were staying this time. The strange thing about losing someone slowly is that you can feel it happening, even while you're still trying to stop it. And every day I felt it slip a little further away. At first it was small things, less excitement in your voice, less warmth in your touch, less reasons to stay up talking all night. And I noticed every change, even the ones you tried to hide. Because when you love someone deeply, you can feel distance before it's spoken. I kept reaching for the version of you that used to choose me naturally, but every conversation started feeling heavier, like we were carrying something already falling apart. I think my heart understood before my mind did. Some people leave emotionally before they physically go. I felt it slip through every silent night between us, through every moment you stopped looking at me the same way. I felt it slip while pretending everything was still okay, and loving you became holding on to something starting conversations, making plans, holding on to routines that no longer felt alive, because I thought effort could save us. But love cannot survive when only one heart keeps reaching. You became emotionally distant in ways too quiet to explain, and somehow that made the loneliness worse, because there was no clear ending, just a slow fading that neither of us knew how to stop. Maybe that's why it still hurts differently, because I watched us disappear in real time. I felt asleep through every delayed reply, through every tight smile, through every goodbye that lasted too long. I felt asleep while convincing myself love could recover naturally. But some things don't break loudly, they just slowly stop being held together. I used to think heartbreak happened suddenly, but now I know sometimes it arrives quietly, through emotional distance, through fading effort, through two people slowly becoming strangers, while still saying could no longer reach. Now when I think about us, I don't remember one exact ending. I just remember the feeling of trying to hold on to love while it slowly slipped away. You left spaces between us, small gaps, quiet pauses, unfinished moments, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I filled the gaps with hope, with excuses, with versions of you that didn't leave. I turned silence into meaning. Your delayed replies became your busy. Your distance became you're tired. Your absence became you'll come back. I kept rewriting reality so it wouldn't hurt as much, because accepting emptiness felt heavier than imagining something still alive. And I got good at it, filling spaces you stopped caring about with effort you never matched, until I couldn't tell anymore what was real and what I created just to survive. Maybe I love the idea of you more than the truth of you. I filled the gaps you left behind in our story, turn missing pieces into something I could hold on to. I filled the gaps while you slowly became less present, and I called it love when it was really just survival. I remember the exact moment it changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like something inside you stopped extending toward me, and I extended myself instead. Longer conversations, deeper patience, more understanding than I ever needed to give. I started doing both sides of us. Your absence became something I compensated for with my own emotional effort, and slowly I stopped noticing I was the only one building anything. You didn't ask me to fix just couldn't stand the emptiness. I filled the gaps until they became the whole relationship. Where you stopped giving, I learned to imagine. I filled the gaps and called it connection. But now I see it clearly, you were gone in parts and I stayed in illusions. Maybe that's what hurts the most. Not that you left, but that I stayed long enough to replace you with coping. I didn't just miss you, I reconstructed you out of silence, out of hope, out of everything you stopped being. I filled the gaps until I forgot what it real felt like, until absence and presence started feeling the same. I filled the gaps and lost myself inside them, because loving someone halfway eventually makes you forget what whole ever meant. Now the gaps are still there, but I don't fill them anymore. I just let them be empty for the first time since you left them behind. I didn't miss it, not even once. The changes, the silence, the distance growing between us. I noticed everything. I just didn't want to believe it. I saw the way your replies got shorter, how your voice stopped carrying warmth, how conversations became something you survived instead of something you enjoyed. I noticed when you stopped asking about me, when you stopped remembering small things, when your attention started drifting even while we were still talking. And I told myself it was nothing, because accepting it would've meant accepting the ending early. So I kept acting like I didn't see it, even though I saw everything. You didn't disappear suddenly, you faded in front of me, piece by piece. I noticed everything, but I stayed quiet anyway. Watched love turn into distance without saying a word. I noticed everything, the silence, the hesitation, the emotional absence. And still I kept hoping it wasn't real. There were nights I could feel it clearly, you sitting beside me, but emotionally somewhere else. I remember studying your expressions, trying to find the version of you that used to care naturally. But it felt like searching for someone who was slowly becoming a memory. And I kept adjusting myself, being more patient, more understanding, more available, thinking maybe effort from my side could bring you back emotionally. But love doesn't return just because one person stays consistent. You never had to say goodbye, your distance said it for you. Maybe that's the cool part of awareness, seeing the ending before it arrives, feeling it early, living it slowly, waiting for it to be official. Even though your heart already left, long before your body It's not because I was blind, but because I stayed anyway. I noticed everything, the fading, the silence, the emotional distance growing between us. And now I understand. Sometimes knowing the truth early doesn't make it easier to leave. I noticed everything and still chose to stay in something I already knew was leaving me back. I think I spent too much time standing in places you stop returning to. Waiting near the edge of us, hoping you'd come closer again. But you never did, and somehow I stayed there anyway. You became harder to recognize emotionally. Same face, same voice, same habits. But your heart felt distant, like every conversation with me was happening through glass. I noticed it slowly, the hesitation in your replies, the way your eyes wandered elsewhere, the growing silence after goodnight. And still I stayed patient, because when you love someone deeply, you start accepting loneliness as if it's normal. You stood with one foot outside the relationship while I kept pretending we were still standing together. I stayed at the edge, watching you drift further away, holding on to memories while you loosened your grip on us. I stayed at the edge long after love stopped feeling safe, because part of me believed if I waited quietly enough, you would come back emotionally. There were nights I could physically feel the distance, even with you beside me. That kind of emptiness changes a person. You begin questioning your worth, your voice, your presence, wondering why your love stopped being enough for someone. And the saddest part is, you never officially left. You just slowly became unavailable, until I learned how to miss you while still having access to you. Maybe that's why healing became difficult, because there was no clear ending, just emotional erosion. I stayed at the edge through every unfinished conversation, through every delayed reply, through every silence that sounded heavier than truth. I stayed at the edge while you quietly stepped away from us. And I think deep down I knew I was waiting for someone already gone. People think heartbreak is loud, but sometimes it's just exhaustion. Sometimes it's staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., realizing you've been loving alone for months. Sometimes it's noticing you became easier to abandon than to understand. And that realization stays with you. I stayed at the edge until there was nothing left to protect, nothing left to fix, nothing left to hope for. the distance I was still trying to close. Now the edge feels empty, and maybe that's a good thing, because I finally stopped waiting for someone who stopped choosing me a long time ago. Some people become memories before they ever become relationships, and maybe that's what we were. Something beautiful that almost happened. We existed somewhere between friendship and love. Late night conversations, lingering eye contact, feelings neither of us knew how to say out loud. And honestly, sometimes it felt more real than actual relationships. You understood parts of me I never explained properly, and I think that's why losing you hurt strangely. Because I'm grieving something that never fully existed. Still, I remember how close we came. One different moment, one different choice, and maybe everything could have changed. We almost happened, and somehow that became unforgettable. We almost crossed the distance between fear and honesty. We almost happened, the timing kept pulling us apart, and now I replay possibilities instead of memories. There were signs everywhere, the way your voice softened around me, the way silence between us never felt uncomfortable, the way goodbye always lasted a little too long, but neither of us moved first. Maybe we were scared, maybe life got complicated, maybe we met at the wrong chapter of ourselves. All I know is some connections feel permanent, even when they never officially begin. And part of me still wonders what we would have become. It's strange missing someone you never truly had. We almost happened through every unfinished conversation, through every moment where love stood quietly between us. We almost happened, and maybe that's why it still lingers, because almost love never really gets closure. Sometimes I think the heart romanticizes unfinished stories, because they never had the chance to disappoint us fully. They stay preserved, untouched by reality, untouched by routine, untouched by endings, just endless possibilities. Living inside memory, we almost happened, and I still carry that feeling with me. Not as regret exactly, more like a quiet ache for something beautiful that never got the chance to fully exist. We almost happened, and somehow that became enough to haunt me longer than some real relationships ever did. Maybe in another version of life we would have chosen each other sooner, but in this one we just became another almost story. Maybe that's the saddest kind of ending. Not a love that failed completely, But a love that almost survived, we almost tried. There were nights we sat together for hours, talking carefully like people trying not to break something fragile. You said you were tired, I said I understood. But underneath every conversation was the fear we were drifting apart. And we both felt it, I could see it in your pauses, in the way your eyes stopped holding on to mine. Still, we kept pretending effort alone could save what was already fading. Love was still there somewhere, just buried underneath silence, distance, and things we never said aloud. We almost tried to become who we used to be again, almost fixed the distance, almost stayed close enough to survive. We almost tried, but almost never reaches forever. And slowly our love turned into memories before either of us admitted it. I remember the small efforts, the late night talks, the temporary closeness, the moments where we held each other like we still knew how. And for a while I thought maybe we could return, but healing requires two hearts moving together, and ours kept missing each other. One of us reaching while the other pulled away quietly, until trying started feeling heavier than letting go. I don't think we stopped loving each other instantly. I think we just stopped knowing how to stay. We almost tried through every silent night between us, through every conversation that ended too early. We almost tried, and somehow that hurts more, because there were moments where I truly believed we could still save ourselves. Maybe some relationships don't collapse dramatically, maybe they slowly grow tired through mistiming, emotional distance, and two people becoming lonely together. And maybe love alone isn't always enough to stop that. Became uneven, the silence became permanent, and the closeness became memory. Almost tried, and I still replay those moments sometimes, wondering if things would have changed if we held on a little differently. But almost is still another word for losing someone. That's left are unfinished conversations, and the quiet ache of remembering how close we came to staying together. Maybe that's what hurts the most, not losing something, but realizing it never fully started. We didn't begin. We stood in that strange space between everything. Not strangers, not lovers, not anything we could clearly name. Just two people slowly becoming important to each other without permission. There were moments where it felt like we were about to start something real, a conversation that could have changed everything. A silence that felt too intimate to ignore, a connection that kept growing without definition. But neither of us stepped forward, and so it stayed unfinished, like a story written but never opened. Maybe we were both waiting for the other to make it real, but time had never arrived for us. We didn't begin, even though it felt like we almost did, even though everything between us looked like the start of something meaningful. We didn't begin, and that's why it still lingers, because unfinished feelings don't know how to leave. I remember how natural it felt talking to you late at night, sharing thoughts I never shared before, feeling understood in ways I wasn't used to. And I think that's where it started becoming dangerous, because comfort can feel like love when you're emotionally alone. But nothing was ever confirmed between us. No labels, no promises, no direction, just possibility. And slowly, possibility became distance, because nothing real was built on it. We were always one moment away from becoming something, but that moment never came. We didn't begin, we only existed in almost, in late replies, in unfinished conversations, in feelings that never fully formed. We didn't begin, and yet it still feels like I lost you, even though I never officially had you. Maybe that's the quiet tragedy of us, not that we ended, but that we never started. Because endings can be healed from, but almost beginnings stay open forever. We didn't begin, but you still left a space in me, a place shaped like something that never got the chance to exist. It didn't begin, and maybe that's why I still think about it, because some connections don't need a beginning to leave a lasting ending. Now I understand, not everything that feels real was ever meant to start, but it still happened inside me, as if it did. We didn't leave, but we didn't arrive either. We stayed somewhere in between, and almost, and maybe, and what could have been. We kept circling the same feelings, never fully stepping in, never fully stepping out, just existing in that quiet space where everything feels close but nothing becomes real. I remember how natural it felt talking to you, laughing with you, feeling understood by you. But something always held us back, a hesitation we never named, a fear we never solved, a timing that never aligned us. Slowly we learned how to stay without becoming anything more. Maybe we were afraid of what would happen if we actually tried. We stayed almost like it was enough to survive, almost close, almost real, almost love. We stayed almost and called it connection, but deep down we both knew almost was never going to hold us together. There were nights nights where it felt like we might finally cross over. The conversation went deeper, the silence felt softer, the distance felt smaller. But morning always reset us back into hesitation, back into uncertainty, back into not knowing what we were. And I think that's what drained me most, not losing you, but never fully having you. Just enough presence to keep me attached, not enough clarity to let me go. We never broke, we just never bent. We stayed almost through every moment that could have changed everything, through every glance, through every almost confession, through every silence that meant too much. Became something undefined, something that existed only in potential. Maybe that's the quiet tragedy of us. Not that we failed, but that we never fully began, because beginnings have endings and we were too afraid of both. So we stayed suspended between what we felt and what we never said. We stayed almost, and I still feel it sometimes, in empty conversations, in unfinished thoughts, and moments that almost matter. We stayed almost, and now I understand some connections don't collapse, they just remain unfinished, forever paused, and what they could have been. We stayed almost, and that's where we still are. In memory and silence and everything we never became. It wasn't that we ended, it was that we never really started. We stopped before us ever had a chance to exist. We were somewhere between becoming and disappearing, talking like we meant something, feeling like we meant something, but never defining what we were. And I think that's where everything slowly broke, not in one moment, but in all the moments we avoided. You stopped reaching first, I stopped trying to understand, and silence started filling in the space between us. I kept waiting for clarity while you stayed emotionally halfway out the door. Maybe we were both afraid of naming something real, because real things can also end. We stopped before us became something true, before love had time to take shape between two hearts. We stopped before us, and all that remains is the feeling of something that never fully arrived. I remember the almost moments, the conversations that felt too deep to be nothing, the silence that felt too close to be safe. And I think we both knew it, but neither of us moved forward. Life kept distracting us, fear kept delaying us, timing kept pulling us apart, until eventually we became something undefined, something that existed only in between possibilities. And that's where we stayed until we disappeared from it. We were never strangers, but we were never fully ours either. We stopped before us became something real, and that's why it still lingers, because but losing the possibility of them, of us, of something that almost happened, and realizing too late that waiting was still a choice. We stopped before us, and time didn't fix it. It just made it clearer that we never crossed into real. We stopped before us, and now I carry that almost like a memory that never fully became one. Maybe that's what we were. Not a beginning, not an ending, just something that stopped too early to be anything at all. Some people become important to you without ever officially being yours, and somehow those are the hardest people to forget, because we were close enough to feel real. We had our own kind of language, late night conversations, long pauses that never felt awkward. The way your voice softened around me naturally, and I started depending on those moments more than I should have, because somewhere along the way you stopped feeling temporary. I remember catching myself smiling at messages from you, like my heart already knew something my mind was still trying to deny. We never called it love, but it carried the same weight. One step closer, and maybe everything would have changed, but we stayed suspended between fear and feeling. We were close enough to imagine a future together, close enough to hurt each other without meaning to. We were close enough to feel like something real, but never close enough to actually become it. There were moments where it almost happened, the way you looked at me too long, the conversations that felt emotionally dangerous, the silences filled with things unsaid. And I think we both noticed it, but timing kept interrupting us. Life moved too fast, fear spoke too loudly, and neither of us knew how to cross the line first. So instead, we stayed emotionally attached inside something undefined, and eventually distance did what honesty never could. Strange grieving someone you never officially had. We were close enough to memorize each other emotionally, close enough to become part of each other's routines. We were close enough for the goodbye to still 8 years later, because unfinished feelings don't disappear easily, don't disappear easily. Maybe some people enter your life just to show you what connection feels like, not to stay forever. And maybe that's why memories of you feel untouched, because reality never got the chance to ruin what we imagined. We were close enough to almost become everything, but almost love has a quiet tragedy to it. It leaves behind questions instead of closure, and sometimes I still wonder who we would have become if one of us had been brave enough to say it first. Now you exist somewhere between memory and possibility. Maybe that's why I still think about you like something unfinished. honest. I think what hurt the most was how believable you sounded. Every I love you, every promise, every almost. You almost meant it. There were moments where I truly felt safe with you. The way you held me close, the way your voice softened at night, the way you looked at me when you forgot to hide your emotions. And maybe that's why it became so confusing later, because someone who never cared couldn't fake tenderness that well, right? So I kept trusting the warmth, even while the distance kept growing. I kept believing your words long after your actions changed. Your love started sounding beautiful, but feeling incomplete. You almost meant it. Every time you said you'd stay, every time you pulled me close while slowly pulling away emotionally. You almost meant it, and that's what made it harder to leave. 'Cause part of me still believed the version of you that loved me honestly existed somewhere. I remember asking if we were okay, and you smiled softly, just enough to calm my fears. But now I realize comfort and honesty are not the same thing. You gave me reassurance instead of truth, and I accepted it, because losing you felt impossible then. I kept ignoring the emptiness, the shorter conversations, the delayed replies, the way your eyes stopped staying with mine, because I wanted your promises to still be real. Maybe you loved me in certain moments, just not enough to remain consistent. You almost meant it, through every fragile conversation, through every quiet night where we pretended nothing changed. You almost meant it, and I almost built my future around you. But almost love still leaves someone heartbroken. I don't think you planned to hurt me. I think you slowly changed while trying to hold on to an old version of us. And maybe that's why your love felt uncertain, 'cause half of you stayed while the other half was already leaving. You almost meant it, and sometimes that feels worse than lying, because real emotion existed somewhere inside you, just not strongly enough to survive reality. You almost meant it, every promise, every touch, every forever. And I almost believed we would make it through. Now when I replay your words, I don't know which parts were real. I just know you sounded convincing enough to break me slowly. The hardest part wasn't losing you, it was believing for a little while that you might stay. There were moments where your love still felt real, small moments, the way you held me half asleep, the way your voice softened sometimes, the way you almost reached for me again. And those moments confuse me, 'cause they gave me hope right when I should have been letting go. I kept building futures out of temporary warmth, while you were already learning how to leave quietly. You never fully disappeared at once. You stayed just enough to keep my heart attached. You almost stayed, and that's what ruined me. You loved me just enough to make leaving hurt longer. You almost stayed, but almost doesn't save anyone. And I kept holding on to pieces of someone already fading away. I remember nights where we laughed like nothing changed, and for a second I believed we survived the distance. But the next morning you felt cold again, like your heart kept moving between staying and leaving. And I think that's what exhausted me most, never knowing if I should fight harder or prepare myself to lose you. Because loving someone uncertain feels like standing on unstable ground. Part of you still cared, but not enough to remain. You almost stayed through all the quiet endings, through all the moments we pretended not to notice. You almost stayed, and I almost believed you would. But love cannot survive inside hesitation forever. Maybe some relationships fail slowly, not because love completely disappears, but because one person keeps doubting while the other keeps hoping. And eventually, hope becomes too heavy to carry alone. You almost stayed, and sometimes I think that hurts more, because if you had fully left sooner, maybe I would have healed faster. But you gave me enough affection to keep waiting, enough closeness to keep believing, while quietly deciding I was no longer where you belonged. Now when I think about us, I don't remember the exact ending. I just remember how painful it felt, watching someone almost choose you over and over again. We stood so close to becoming something real, close enough to feel it, close enough to imagine it. But when the moment came, you didn't cross over. There was always something between us, not distance exactly, more like hesitation. The kind that lingers inside long eye contact, inside unfinished conversations, inside feelings neither person fully admits. And still, I thought eventually we would stop pretending, because nobody looks at someone like that without feeling something deeper. I kept waiting for certainty from you, while you stayed carefully undecided. You stood at the edge of us, but never fully stepped in. You didn't cross over, even when the feeling was obvious, even when silence between us felt heavier than words. You didn't cross over, and I kept waiting anyway, hoping one day you'd finally choose us completely instead of halfway. I remember moments that felt dangerously close to love. The nights we talked until sunrise, the way your voice changed around me, the comfort that existed naturally between us. And honestly, part of me believed we were only one honest conversation away from becoming real. But every time things deepened, you pulled back slightly, just enough to keep us unfinished. And I learned how painful uncertainty becomes when feelings stay trapped and almost. Maybe you cared deeply, just not deeply enough to risk everything for it. You didn't cross over through all the chances we were given, through every moment that could have changed our story. You didn't cross over, and eventually time carried us apart. But part of me still lives inside the version of life where you finally did. I think unfinished love stays longer in the heart because there's no clear ending, just endless wondering what would have happened if fear was quieter, if timing was kinder, if one of us had spoken sooner. And sometimes those questions ache more than actual heartbreak. You didn't cross over, but you came close enough to haunt me, close enough to become unforgettable without ever becoming mine. You didn't cross over, and now all that remains are memories built from almost moments and feelings with nowhere to go. Maybe in another life you would have chosen differently, but in this one you stayed standing on the other side of maybe. I think I understood it too late. You were never fully gone, but you were never fully here either. You held back always, and I kept loving through it. You never stepped in completely, always have a presence, always have a feeling, always halfway between staying and leaving. I could feel it in everything you did, the way you chose your words carefully, the way your silence lasted just a little too long, the way your affection arrived but never stayed. And I kept adjusting myself, trying to fit inside your emotional distance, like love could survive without certainty. You held back always, even when I needed more from you, even when the moment called for something real. You held back always, and I kept hoping you would change, but love can't grow properly inside hesitation. I remember the good moments, the almost confessions, the almost confessions, the almost moments that felt like clarity, but they never stayed long enough. Every time I thought we were becoming real, you pulled yourself slightly away again. Not enough to leave, but enough to never fully arrive. And that confusion slowly became my reality. I stopped knowing where I stood with you, while still standing beside you. Maybe you didn't know how to love fully, or maybe you just never chose to. You held back always, Maybe that's why it hurt so slowly, because there was never one moment of breaking, just constant emotional hesitation that wore me down over time. And I kept calling it patience when it was actually loneliness. You held back always, and I stayed where you could reach me, waiting for you to decide what I already felt deeply. You held back always, and that became the reason we never fully became anything, but still hurt like we were everything. Now I understand. Some people don't leave loudly, they just never fully arrive. And that's how I lost you, without ever truly having you. You didn't break everything loudly, you just left it there, unfinished, unspoken, unresolved, like something I was supposed to understand on my own. There was no final moment, no clear goodbye, no closure, no explanation that made sense of it all. Just distance growing quietly between two people who once felt close enough to believe in forever. You stopped showing up emotionally long before you physically left. And I kept thinking, maybe it was temporary, maybe we were just tired, maybe we'd come back to each other naturally. But you had already placed your silence where your presence used to be. And I didn't know if I was supposed to hold on or let go, because you never told me. You left it there, the version of us that almost worked, left it hanging in the middle of everything, like an unfinished sentence. Walked away without explaining, while I stayed trying to understand what was never completed. I kept revisiting memories, looking for a turning point, a moment where everything changed. But nothing dramatic happened, just small emotional withdrawals, quiet distancing, subtle changes I didn't want to admit were real. You became harder to reach, not suddenly, but gradually, like someone turning down the volume of their love without telling me it was happening. And I was the only one still listening at full volume. Maybe you thought leaving quietly was kinder, but silence is still an answer. You left it there between us and what we could have been, never fixing it, never closing it, never naming it. You left it there, and I kept returning to it, like something unfinished was still meant to be understood. I think that's the hardest part, not losing someone, but losing clarity. Because when there's no ending, your mind keeps writing one over just left behind to fade on their own. You left it there, you left it there. And I finally learned that not everything unfinished was meant to be found again. We stood at the edge of something, not falling, not leaving, just waiting. And I thought eventually you would jump in with me, but you never jumped. There were moments where everything felt ready, the connection, the silence, the way we understood each other without trying. It felt like we were standing right before something real, just one step away. But you stayed careful, always observing, always hesitating, always holding yourself just slightly back. And I kept thinking, maybe you just needed time. But time didn't change your distance, it only made it clearer. You were never fully willing to fall. I think I was already in it while you were still deciding. You never jumped even when I was already reaching for you. Even between us felt like it was ready to become something. You never jumped and I kept standing there alone, holding on to the idea that you would eventually follow. I remember the almost moments when your voice softened, when your presence felt closer, when it seemed like you were finally about to choose it. But every time you pulled back just enough, not leaving, not staying, just suspended between both. And I started realizing some people don't fear losing you, they fear fully choosing you. And that was you, someone who stayed close enough to keep me believing, but never close enough to commit to falling. Maybe I mistook your hesitation for depth. You never jumped, and I turned waiting into a habit. Never jumped, and I called your almost choice a sign of love. But love doesn't survive on someone standing still forever. Maybe the hardest part wasn't the loss, it was realizing you would never fall in the same way I was. You were always looking down, calculating, deciding, while I was already in the end. Never jumped, and I stayed in the space between us too long, holding on to something that only existed in potential. You never jumped, and now I understand. Some people don't leave you, they just never arrive with you. I thought we were about to fall together, but in the end, I was the only one who ever left the edge. For a long time, I blamed myself for losing you, until I realized you started leaving long before I stopped holding on. You pulled away first. It happened slowly enough that I kept doubting my instincts. You still answered, still smiled sometimes, still stayed beside me physically, but emotionally you were harder to reach every day. Our conversations became careful, like we were both avoiding something fragile. And I kept trying harder, giving more attention, more patience, more pieces of myself, while your effort quietly faded. I thought love could survive if at least one person kept fighting, but relationships don't heal through one-sided hope. You pulled away first, even if you never admitted it. Through silence, through distance, through the warmth, you slowly stopped giving. You pulled away first, while I stayed emotionally loyal, trying to save something you already stopped choosing. I remember the exact feeling, sitting beside you while missing you at the same time. That kind of loneliness changes a person, because you start grieving quietly before the relationship officially ends. I kept replaying old memories, trying to understand what changed. But maybe nothing dramatic happened. Maybe you just slowly outgrew us, while I kept building my life around you. And honestly, that realization broke me slowly. You stopped reaching naturally, and I kept mistaking survival for love. You pulled away first, through every unfinished conversation, through every delayed reply, through every moment your eyes looked elsewhere. You pulled away first, and I think part of me knew it all along. I was just too attached to accept the ending. Maybe that's why healing took so long, because I spent months blaming myself for a distance I didn't create alone. I kept wondering what I lacked when the truth was simpler. You had already emotionally left before I realized we were disappearing. You pulled away first, and I stayed until there was nothing left to save. Through all the silence, all the uncertainty, all the nights I felt alone beside you. You pulled away first, and I finally understand now. Love doesn't end suddenly. Sometimes one heart leaves quietly, while the other keeps trying to catch up. I don't blame myself the same way anymore, because looking back, I can finally see you were already gone before